and gentlemen, dear guests, a warm welcome to our presentation of the Ecumenical Report on Religious Freedom Worldwide. This is the third time since 2013 and 2017 that the German Bishops' Conference and the Protestant Church in Germany published a common report on religious freedom worldwide. It is based on the findings of an ecumenical working group who investigated, from a Christian perspective, restrictions and violations of the universal human right of freedom of religion, belief and conscience. The report underlines that human rights cannot be deliberated separately, but must be seen in its relation to other human rights. Only as a whole, within a comprehensive protection system, human rights enable individual freedoms to unfold. One of the driving factors for publishing the report can be found in the ecumenical partnerships worldwide maintained by churches in Germany, and the strong sense of Christian solidarity creating an obligation to underline the particular plight of brothers and sisters in faith. The report not only deals with a number of country reports, but also highlights the connection of the fundamental right of religious freedom to different contexts and cross-cutting issues like migration, gender equality and non-discrimination, but also shrinking spaces for civil society or right-wing populism. It is worth pointing out that while churches defend the right to religious freedom, they are inspired by the respect for the dignity of every person. Following the logic of the universality of civil rights and liberties, the Church's commitment to the freedom of religion and belief therefore seeks to benefit all people. Let me point out one last prerequisite for our debate. For the Protestant Church in Germany, EKD, the state of play on freedom of religion or belief, FORB, is a litmus test for the general human rights situation in a country. Therefore, EKD's commitment to FORB cannot be separated from the general human rights work of Protestant churches and their agencies. I'm very happy that we gathered today a quite prominent panel in order to discuss some of the findings of the report. I will introduce you later and will end my little introduction by saying that the report is also about to be translated into English. We are expecting it to be finalized in the near future, and of course you will be kept in the loop and we will provide the translation to you. Before now entering into the debate though, and taking on your questions and comments later, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Dr. Patrick Schnabel. He is one of the co-authors of the report and was the Protestant co-chair of the Ecumenical Committee preparing it. Patrick Schnabel holds theological degrees from St. Andrews and Göttingen universities and a PhD in law from Potsdam University. He is an expert on FORB, has published widely, some times together with Dr. Kitanovic, and currently works as theological counselor at our office in Berlin. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katrin, Elizabeta, respected Frans van Daele, esteemed guests and friends here at EKD House in Brussels. I thank you for the invitation and your interest in our Ecumenical Report, and welcome the opportunity to briefly present its outline and major findings here so close to the political heart of Europe. For human rights are core to the soul of our European project. And the freedom of religion and belief, you said it, Katrin, is a key marker for the state of fundamental rights and democracy in general. FORB is particularly useful for describing what these rights are all about. Individual freedom on the one hand, and social fibre on the other hand. Both aspects are inseparably part of this right, which makes it paradigmatic for understanding the concept and dogmatics of fundamental rights more broadly. Let me briefly explain this steep and complex claim. FORB is essentially individualistic, as it protects each person's possibility to determine his or her relation to life, to the world, and what meaning we attach to both. It's about one's very own place and space in the cosmos. Even within one faith group or philosophy, no two persons will describe their understanding of these things exactly in the same way. If you believe in a higher being or draw your beliefs and ethics from immanent sources, how you believe, how you practice, all this is deeply personal, reaching to the very core of your personality and identity. But at the same time, for an individual belief to become a religion, it needs to interrelate to other persons' beliefs and interact with other persons' cultic practices. There is a definite distinction between theoretical convictions, such as theism, and belief in the sense protected by form. Opinions or personal hypotheses enjoy legal protection as well, of course, but they do not need to resonate with others. Beliefs, religious or secular, are always embedded in more or less comprehensive and coherent systems of understanding the world. And as a rule, they are not limited to seeking such understanding, but aim at transforming first the believer and then through him or her the world. Religion is not only cultic but also social practice. A collective, even a corporate dimension, is inherent to this right. Even the dissenter descends from something, some pre-existing system of teaching, and most will seek to find followers of their own for this interpretation, this new interpretation of their faith or belief. But even those who just want to change or transform their own lives and have no missionary ambition at all, want to be able to actually live according to their spiritual insights. So, no belief, religious or other, is ever detached from social practice. However, nowhere in this world is religious practice without challenges. Of course, there's quite a wide spectrum. From outright persecution to sporadic violations to more atmospheric disturbances, giving people the subjective feeling of inequality. Our report wants to highlight these differences, showing that different shades of grey pervade. This qualitative approach significantly differs from more quantitative approaches, trying to rank countries in a persecution index or the like. Having said that, it is of course quite obvious that here in the European Union, most Western states, form generally enjoys a high level of protection, whereas it is coming under severe pressure in more and more countries worldwide. In this, it mirrors the general state of the rule of law and democracy, and thus it can well serve as an indicator for the state of play in the world. So when doing advocacy for Christians, we do so pars pro toto, living solidarity with our brothers and sisters, but being aware that their freedom would be insufficient if the same freedom would not be granted to others. In promoting freedom of religion or belief, we do so pars pro toto, putting emphasis on one fundamental right, which is important for us as churches, but being aware that FORB is always and must be guaranteed alongside all the other fundamental rights and the rule of law itself. You cannot find freedom of religion or belief where there is no freedom of opinion, of the press, of assembly, of association, of property, etc. Even for religious communities themselves, it is totally impossible to act within this world if all these other rights are not guaranteed as well. So with these preliminary remarks, I have, I hope, explained why we focus on one human right and one faith group in particular without wanting to be exclusive at all. And even with these self-chosen limitations, a report like ours cannot be in any way comprehensive. So please bear with our small choices for the moment. And incidentally, I've given, Katrin has already given you as well the main structure of the report, which is twofold, thematic and country related. The report itself has three parts. The frame is more theoretical, explaining this particular human right to non-experts in a way that does not oversimplify, but at the same time deliver a sense of the complexity of the issue. And I'm particularly proud of a sort of questionnaire that we have put in the annexes, which we gave to the persons working in or with the countries that are reflected in the report, because it gave us the opportunity to present to you comparable country reports and show you the framework from which we are trying to understand the situation human rights and freedom of religion and belief in particular are facing in certain real-life contexts. And the first main part is thematic. We are looking at cross-cutting issues. Katrin has named them, and the second part is country-related. The countries covered are Ethiopia, Belarus, China, Denmark, Germany, Eritrea, India, Israel, Palestine, Myanmar, Russia, Syria, and Iraq, and Turkey. My time allowance here is too short to summarize even all the key points that you find in the thematic part and in the country reports. But I want to shortly take you into some of the issues that I personally find particularly interesting. The first is folk and indigenous people. I find this so interesting because it is to a large extent as yet unexplored territory in human rights scholarship. Human rights doctrine is very much shaped by the logic of Western Enlightenment. It is part of our concept of social progress. This is somewhat at odds with indigenous cultures. The separation between nature, culture and religion, in the way it is inherent to our way of perceiving the world, does not apply to many indigenous identities. Classic ethnology fails to comprehend the role of religion in such identities and vaguely describes indigenous cultures as being bound up with some sort of natural spirituality, vague as I said. Our concepts understand that a cathedral or a monastery or even a cemetery is a holy site, but struggle to perceive of a river or whole landscape as holy. We know Catholic rights, but struggle to understand that communal decision-making processes can have a spiritual element, can be a sort of spiritual encounter. And even if we do understand these things, we easily adopt a mutual approach to them, trying to preserve some status quo, or even status quo ante, colonialism that is, denying indigenous peoples to try and better adapt their traditions to modern ways of life and exercising ownership of them. Trying to accept these differences without falling into the trap of othering indigenous peoples, fitting their needs into the legal and institutional framework of the international human rights regime, without making them fit unfitting preconceptions, is a challenge. It clearly shows how dynamic the protection of folk must be in order to satisfy real-life needs. Another very pertinent aspect, and I think you will all agree, is folk and populism, in particular right-wing populism. There's quite often an unholy alliance of populists and religions, and even though they don't seem to be natural allies. Just think of former US President Donald Trump and all the contradictory, even paradox features of his years in power. Himself an adulterer, he was supporting and being supported by extreme evangelicals. Himself rather anti-Semitic, he was the strongest ally of the most religiously extreme government Israel has ever had. And you can find similar examples with all the populists everywhere in the world. I think we have more time to discuss all these aspects later. I just want to make one final remark, and that is that freedom of religion and religions, the right must protect something, are very important for social cohesion here in Europe and elsewhere. Obviously, no one should be forced to have any specific opinion or any opinion at all. But where would our society be if all people were indifferent? Likewise, no one should be forced to consume any specific medium or become an editor for it. But what would our public discourse look like if no one did? No one should be forced to found or join an association. But how would civil society be organized if no one did? No one should be forced to become a member of a trade union or engage in industrial action, but where would employees' rights stand without such exercises? And yes, no one should be forced to have a certain belief or join any faith group, but where? Would our values, our compassion, our hope come from if no one did? The exercise of fundamental rights is indispensable for open, democratic and pluralist societies. They may require management in sound jurisdiction, because they can be in conflict with each other. But first and foremost, they need support and protection, so that we may live in the kind of society that any human would aspire to. We hope that our report may contribute to this aim in the sector we as churches know best, religion and the freedom it needs to prosper. I thank you for your attention.
Please join us, Mr. van Daele, at my side. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I start with the introduction of the panelists, and I'm very glad that Baron van Daele made it today. Let me call you by your name, Franciscus Romanus Romualdus Frans Baron van Daele. He's a former Belgian diplomat who served inter alia as permanent representative of Belgium to the EU and NATO, and as head of cabinet of Herman van Rompuy during his role as the first president of the European Council. And moreover, he also served as head of cabinet of the Belgian king. In December last year, he then was appointed as special envoy for the protection and promotion of religious freedom outside the EU. We are very honored and glad to have you with us today. A very warm welcome. Next to me is my dear colleague, Dr. Elizabeta Kitanovic. She studied theology and international affairs and graduated from the Diplomatic Academy of the Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. After working for the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Serbian Foreign Office for a while, she joined the Conference of European Churches, where she works today as Program Officer on Advocacy and Dialogue. She has been working on FORB for more than a decade, has been inter alia chair of CAC's Working Group on Human Rights, and is the editor of many books on the issue, some together with Patrick, and also works a lot as a lecturer for young students. Also, warm welcome to you. Elizabeta, let me immediately start with you. I think the mic is on. Yes. With your expertise and background, when you look at this German church report on FORB, where do you see the added value of a Christian contribution to the debate compared, for example, to a secular one?
Thank you, Katrin, and thank you very much for this invitation, and Patrick for presenting the report. I have read the summary in English and it's really great. Whoever was working on summary, thank you so much. So, what is added value of this report? First, it is in itself that it exists. When there is nothing, it's perfect that we have something. So we have to start. So I think congratulations first for the initiative, secondly for the implementation of the initiative. So, when we discuss freedom of religion or belief for all, this was usual, let's say, a phrase that we heard also, let's say, in international legal and academic circles, also in the secular society, but also we have started as churches discussing and taking this freedom of religion or belief for all. We have seen that it's not so easy to deal with freedom of religion or belief for all, while we, as churches, for example, we are speaking about church-state relations and at the same time taking the international legal point of view from the side of religious freedom, then we somehow maybe exclude religion-state relations and so on. So I think that there is a very interesting space for discussion.
Sorry, could you elaborate a bit on that? In which way?
Yes, because when we talk about church-state relations, that means implementation of religious freedom, let's say, within the legal system in one country, okay? And somehow, as we live in the predominantly, let's say, Christian continent with Judeo-Christian roots that we have in the secular society, okay? To add even more layers in this complexity, we are talking about church-state relations very often, right? When we talk about the implementation of religious freedom law. And then if we speak with other communities, with Jewish communities, with Muslim communities about church-state relations, I think it would be maybe sounded better that we speak about religious-state relations, simply to include everybody, because we speak freedom of religion or belief for all. So that was, I think that there is a little bit nuance.
But I think in the German context we have widened that approach. People talk usually no more about state church law, but religion and state relationships. But actually, yeah, that's a good point. But coming back to your first verse and to your role also for the Conference of European Churches. So, in which way is CAC specifically contributing to the debate around FORM?
Well, we had several approaches. One pillar was human rights education, that we have built some school for human rights, they have hosted also several times. You have been contributed from the academic and political point of view, financial point of view. We have did it basically together. Without you, we could not do it. So human rights education is one pillar. Second pillar is advocacy on the cases of religious freedom. For example, in different cases when we write to Francis, or to European External Action Service, Human Rights Department, Council of Europe, OSCE, of course we are engaging in advocacy for particular cases, especially in the cases just in one day in CAC. We have been dealing with the issues in Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, we had Kosovo, and we had Israel and Palestine. So that was just one day in CAC where we have been discussing how to approach some of these issues in terms of advocacy on religious freedom.
Okay, that's a lot and gives a good insight in what you are doing. Mr. Van Daele, you started your very challenging post less than a year ago. Why do you think that freedom of religion is such a special human right?
Well, when I accepted this position, I was not fully aware of what a new world I would be on the verge of discovering. And I must say that this has been the case for 1 year, and the contacts I've had, the studies I've made are quite rewarding, and understanding a bit better what religious freedom is about is a value in itself. Which brings me to my second point. When I mentioned inside the European Union that I have been appointed special envoy for the protection of freedom of religion and freedom of conviction, most people look at me and say, what is that? What a problem are they trying to solve here? Because most people think that first reaction is, this guy is dealing with freedom of religion inside the European Union. So no, it's about. But still, I'm struck by the fact that inside the European Union, in most countries, most people, the biggest part of public opinion is indifferent. They are not hostile. There are groups which are hostile for historical reasons, but essentially they are indifferent, and they are wondering what I'm up to.
Which is a good sign. Which is a good sign that they are wondering, so they are not indifferent. They are curious at least.
Now, it is a fact that freedom of religion or the separation between state and church remains still very much a national matter for each and every single country. I'll give you one example. Part of my family is French. I'm Belgian. The separation between church and state in our two countries, who are very close, is completely different. In most schools in Belgium are Catholic schools, a minority are state schools, but even the state schools, by law, children have to choose, or the parents of the children have to choose a religion for religious education. In France, this is unthinkable. I remember I had an aunt in France somewhere in the countryside, and every Saturday and Sunday she was teaching the Catholic religion to the kids of the village, because that could not happen at school. So maybe it has something to do with the fact that we have been so strict in separating church and religion that maybe explains the indifference which I encounter. Then, well, if you indifference. You have to arm yourself with a couple of good arguments to try and push them out of their indifference. And that is an experiment in itself. My third point, which, if you allow me to make, which strikes me in this job I have now been asked to do, is the complexity. And there are different sources of complexity. Now, of course, and I saw this, you mentioned a number of countries in your report. The situation I have discovered is different in each and every country. You have governments who basically try to get rid of religion. You have governments who try to have two religions fight each other, divide ut impes. And so the number of situations is different. I was at, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference in Salt Lake City organized by the Mormon Church at the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And most of the representatives came from Latin America, Africa and Asia, where the Mormon Church is trying to convert people. The diversity of each situation was tremendous, and that makes the job of being a special envoy quite complicated. And I would ask you a question, seeing the list in the report, then I ask, this is an interesting list, but why is this country or that country not on the list? And maybe you will enlighten me. That's the first source of complexity. The second source of complexity is, of course, different religions. I'm now I intend to go to Iraq. We are negotiating with the Iraqi government because there are a number of problems which you may know. What's happening to Cardinal Sacco of the Chaldean Church, the fact that the Yazidi law has not been fully implemented. So, Iraq, place to go. And then, studying, I discovered there are 18 different religious communities in that country. I mean, the complexity and the temptation for secular governments to play off one religion against the other makes it an extremely challenging mission. And the third point of complexity is what you call by a word which can only exist in the German language, Querdurchschnitt-Themen. In Dutch, we fabricate words by stringing them together, but we have never reached the degree of complexities of our German French. And it is true, the religion, freedom of religion, you have to think about the effect on migration, you have to think about gender equality. You enter basically into a minefield, and the basic purpose of a special envoy is not to blow himself up in the minefield, but I know it's there.
Yeah, but with your experience, I'm sure you are able to maneuver all the obstacles, but thanks very much for giving this oversight, and I will pick up on some things you mentioned later on, but let's turn to Patrick, and maybe you want to first answer the question of Mr. van Daele on your choice of countries.
Yes, the answer is pretty easy. Our public relations department told us this is already much too thick. If you want people to actually read, especially politicians. And so we had to make a selection, and the second answer is this is the third in a series of reports, and we need to keep some of the more interesting countries for the fourth report, so people will read that as well. And obviously we try to be somewhat up to the time and choose those countries that we think are very pertinent right now, and also which reflect or which mirror the cross-cutting issues, the questions that we have chosen. So for example, if we talk about religion and security, an issue that Elizabeta has covered widely in her work, also with the support of EU funds in the SASI project, Safe and Stronger Communities in Europe, you will see there that religious groups and their sites, early sites, are very apt and easy targets for terrorists. First, because these groups often think they have divine protection and are somewhat naive about security, and thinking violence has no place in our community, so why should we be attacked? But from a terrorist's point of view, if you want to get media attention, you just don't kill anyone. You kill a priest or a monk, ideally during Celtic service. You don't simply vandalize some building, you vandalize a religious building. That will get you the most attention. So religion and security are very closely related, and you pointed out in some countries, even governments make use of that, even in Impera. And so the Counsel report on Ethiopia clearly shows that clergy, that temples, synagogues, churches are specifically targeted to weaken communities, to disrupt communities, to take hope away from people. So you have the issue of populism, and look at Russia.
Maybe Patrick, here I can come in because actually I wanted to dwell a bit on that point. So maybe you mentioned it already in your introductory remarks that this is one of the thematic areas you're looking into the report, populism and thought, and this is also part of the complexity Mr. van Daele was alluding to. So maybe you can enlighten us a bit. What were your findings on this thematic area, and give us maybe some examples where religion is instrumentalized maybe by populists?
Yes, if the country I just mentioned, Russia, is a very good example of how one particular church is being instrumentalized in the service of a nationalist narrative. And you will find that with populists all over the world, and not only Christian populists. Look at India, where Hindu nationalism is a very strong topic. Myanmar, where Buddhist nationalism is a key issue. So it's not any one religion. All religions can be instrumentalized by nationalists and populists, and they quite easily do that. They often do that, and religious actors are sometimes prone to fall victim to this because it gives them, at least for the short term, importance in their regional settings. Look at the Russian Orthodox Church. Look where it stood during communist time and where it stands now. So there is a trap also for religions themselves. So we are trying to highlight this and show, and that's also something KAK is working on, how religious actors can become resilient to the populist temptation.
And that's a very nice transition to Elizabeta, because I know that during your summer school on human rights you've also been tackling that issue, and maybe it would be interesting to listen from you. What were your findings about the means that churches and civil society have to counteract this instrumentalization we just heard about?
Thank you. Well, through the Summer School of Human Rights and to the different conferences that we have organized, we have approached this topic, and we have recently published a book, Patrick and myself, together with Sophia, which is called Alternative to Populism from Human Rights Perspective, which was the outcome of these discussions. And why did we start this discussion was that we have seen that there is certain, let's say, a political influence of, let's say, of politicians and society, somehow, I don't know, spreading a little bit hate, if I may say so, like among religious communities, or using religious context to stir up the hate within society. So that was one of our biggest concerns when we did conference on alternative to populism from human rights perspective. And first we wanted to know a little bit deeper what is it, because when we talk about right-wing populism or left-wing populism, we have different things on our mind, yeah? And because it depends from which country, from which church, from which context, individual or collective, and so on. And then also because we have seen a lot, what Patrick mentioned, attacks on worship places, on synagogues, on mosques or churches. We wanted to know a little bit deeper the reasons why this is happening in Europe in the last period, in past, let's say, 2 decades. What stir up, what is the root cause, and so on. And what we have done, we have invited Muslim and Jewish communities to explain to us their vision of anti-Semitism, because as a researcher, every one of us can research about anti-Semitism or Islamophobia as his or her point of view, but to listen from them, from their point of view, that was, I think, added value in our discussions, and as well with the civil society, with academia, and also with other NGOs to look a little bit deeper how together we can counter these populistic views and simply helping to churches and religious communities to stay away and not to be misused in these debates, because it is very easy, because populist messages are very simplistic. You have mentioning in your introduction many shades of grey, and then when we get simplistic messages, black or white, we're against migrants, LGBTIQ, what I saw in your report, then against, I don't know, like abortion, there is current debate in France. Yeah, we are just against something, so it's very easy, it's black and white, so we don't need to switch our brain and think about different shades and say, okay, it is more acceptable, there is this plurality, diversity and so on, that we can live with in peace with each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very, very valuable that you looked into this, because it, unfortunately, there's a rise in populism all through the EU, and the topic won't disappear so soon, I guess. Mr. van Daele, what is your take on the instrumentalization of religion for political means? Which role do you think can the EU play in preventing fake news and misunderstandings about religious freedom?
Well, there will always be an amount of instrumentalization. Let's be realistic about it. It happens here, it happens elsewhere. You have to look at the degree, but you allow me to make a double remark on methodology. The first is that we should, when we speak to countries outside the European Union, we should always remember that, let's say, religious stability or peace is only a very recent phenomenon in the European Union. I give you a personal example. I was born and raised in Holland, I'm half Dutch, and in the little village where I grew up, 2/3 were Catholics and 1/3 were Protestants. I can tell you, between the age of 7, when I went to primary school, to the age of 12 when we returned to Belgium, I have never met a Protestant boy of my age. Now, if I look at Holland now, which is a country which I adore, you see that the Protestants, the Calvinists, and the Catholics are in the same political party. So, in 50 years' time, gosh, things have changed. So if they can change quickly, for the better or for the worse, but I'm talking about change, then it should be possible in a number of countries outside the Union, which brings me to the second point of methodology. If I go somewhere, of course, if there is a problem, you have to say to people, to governments, this is an important problem, and if you don't want to have too much quarrels in the European Parliament, you should better do something about it. But essentially, the idea is to start building dialogue mechanisms with a number of countries, which often have already a dialogue in human rights, but with no particular attention for religious freedom. Because I think that dialogue will help people to change their frame of mind. If you propose dialogue, you end up reinforcing the position of the more moderate forces in a given religion, and that can help. And I conclude with a quote, which probably is not politically correct, from a former cardinal, God may have his soul. He said the difference between Islam and Christianity is that Christianity went through the fires of the French Revolution. but that's of course not for important purposes.
Thank you. Allow me just to ask you a second question, talking again about the complexity you mentioned before of the issue or the human right of folk in general. Do you still see the added value of contextualizing it as it has been done in the report to put folk into perspective with security, with populism as we just had it, with indigenous people, or is this just adding to the complexity and not really helpful?
I think it is very helpful and very necessary from 2 points of view. First of all, people who take a genuine interest in freedom of religion and freedom of conviction should understand and should take account of the fact that there are other human rights, and it's always the same thing. One human right stops where another human right begins. And I know it's tricky. Look about religious freedom and gender equality. There are a number of churches who have solved that problem. Other churches have not solved this problem. And you can go on, but I think to have a real grasp of dynamics and factors, you have to take account of, freedom of religion is not a kind of a self-standing, isolated kind of point. No, I think tactically we have interest in integrating it sufficiently into the whole field of human rights, because if you make it into a completely isolated kind of other type of right, then you will end up marginalizing the notion. That's my first point. The second reason why I liked the Querdurchschnitte was that if you talk about security, if you talk about migration, if you talk about poverty, all these policies are in the hands of governments or of our institutions, and we should explain to them that each and every one of the problems I mentioned can be helped, can be solved in part by the input coming from religions. Look, the most obvious example is what Protestant and Christians, and I know, having been ambassador in Washington, I've had many contacts with religious denominations, as they call them there. They do a lot against poverty, against individual isolation, and so we should continue explaining to governments that in these very difficult questions our governments have to solve, religions can play a positive and useful part.
Thank you very much. I think we can fully subscribe to that, and also doing a lot of advocacy work in Germany to have the nexus between religion and development, religion and foreign policy really enshrined also in our policy making, which is sometimes easier and sometimes more difficult, depending on the government. Patrick, I now want to start the last round on the panel before opening the floor and looking forward to your comments and questions. I want to turn now to the country reports. So you have named all the numbers of countries you've looked into, and then there was a little surprise that you also chose Denmark and Germany among countries like China, Turkey or Myanmar. So why, out of the 27 EU member states, you chose those two? And is there not the danger of downplaying the severe breaches of human rights in the named non-EU countries by adding these two member states?
Yes, we've been thinking about how to deal with Europe, and decided that unlike the German government's report, which is very similar in structure, but neither covers Germany nor any friendly countries, we want to be less partial and show that it's better you took that up. There are different shades of grey, and there are some very black countries indeed. But there are many countries that are darker grey, middle grey, or lightish greyish, and even the European Union. I think it's important to note that religious freedom is not a given, and that there are violations, not necessarily intended, but sometimes you have political bias, sometimes you have simple lack of understanding. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we published this report with a lengthy introductory part on what freedom of religion and or belief is about and what it is not about, because we simply can't expect people to know anymore, not even in the federal ministries. We have a sort of lack of alphabetization on religious issues with the younger generation of civil servants. So some decisions that are being taken violate unintentionally, but they do, and sometimes, as I said, there is bias. If you look into asylum seekers' legal processes, sometimes people do not understand reasons. For example, if someone is being baptized during the process and cannot return to their country, it's not up to the state to question the reason why people have been baptized. They just need to look whether that has severe and dangerous consequences if people return. And then it's our part to being advocates for the freedom of religion of people who during an asylum seekers process become Christians, and other religious communities have the same issues, and that happens right within the heart of Europe, right in Germany, where we have a very, very high standard. We are very proud of the high standards we have in relation to fall through the German Grundgesetz, through the jurisdiction of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany. But there are issues, and we chose Denmark because they could see that even in countries that we would never say have a populist government, there are populist tendencies where religion is instrumentalized. And Denmark has been discussing, for example, to force all religious communities to have all sermons translated into Danish, which shows that there is a bias. And I personally don't think that you will prevent terrorism through that. Anyway, but it was applied to all religions without any reason to be suspicious of a certain group. And these are tendencies that we must name and to a certain extent shame.
Yeah, thank you. That made it clear. Elizabeta, I want to ask you now, widening again the perspective a bit, about your assessment of the overall situation. Where do you see, from your expert point of view, the biggest challenges right now when it comes to religious freedom? Are they outside or inside the EU?
I think both. I would go first inside and then outside. I think first of all it's great that we have special envoy on religious freedom outside of the European Union, but also due to the complexity of church-state relations in the European Union and in Europe. Of course, we cannot have also one person for religious freedom inside of the European Union. It would be impossible, I think. So at least on the external side, we have a person to address the issue, to raise our concern, and to see how within the economic and trade agreements these human rights clauses can be implemented externally. So the challenges, if I look in the last 15 years, these challenges went, let's say religious freedom was not known so much as fundamental right. Maybe it developed, let's say, last 30 years. If we look at the legal frameworks, I don't know, Helsinki Final Act, 1975, and further on until today, we could see that almost every time from European desk there is a different country which has some problem with religious freedom. Either from security point of view, that it was discussed here, like attacks on mosques, synagogues, churches, like killing the priest, like in January this year, it was a case in Spain. We have just a few days ago attack with Molotov cocktails in synagogue in Berlin, that I don't go further. One issue is, one challenge is security perspective. Secondly, it's religious symbols in the public sphere. We have discussed this 10 years ago. We couldn't find common opinion in the Council of Europe, and then it resulted with the manual on wearing religious symbols in the public sphere. It was just detecting the problems, not having solution for the problems. So that remains on the agenda. Internally, inside of the European Union, we have still only walls. We just had terrorist attack last week, alert number 4, here in the heart of the European Union. And of course, again, there is religious component into it that we must not neglect it, which invite us to self-criticism, self-reflexivity, that we need to pay attention. How do we deal with religious minorities in terms of, let's say, religious-state relation? This is why I'm taking this component. That simply we have to work more also inside of European Union to strengthen this, not only interreligious dialogue, because interreligious dialogue is one point, but interreligious cooperation on significant issues, whether these are bioethical questions, or it's climate change, or it's anti-discrimination, or anything else, but not only discussing, let's say, theological issues and so on. So I think internally we have lots of work to do. All together, because we have common and shared responsibility as churches, religious communities, philosophical, non-confessional organizations, and civil society and academia, media, all in, let's say, one goal, that we prevent this happening. Now, internally, externally, why this happened and why we had people killed on the street. Of course, we have the neighborhood, Middle East, very turbulent in these times. And of course, we have to somehow coordinate internal and external policies and trade of the European Union with the state of fundamental rights inside of the European Union. Because and I know it's very hard. It's really very, very hard to balance human rights laws in economic and trade agreements, and to keep the peace, let's say, at home, that we don't have this sort of attacks, but somehow we need to find a way. And another challenge, what I see also, which was mentioned also from good speakers, was that Christian populism, Jewish populism, Islamic populism, Hindu populism that you have mentioned. I mean, I don't know in the upcoming years and how we are going to deal with this. It is on the rise. What to do, it is another question for the research and discussion, but it's not going to go away, what was said in the debate.
Yeah. Wow, you opened quite a wide range of topics. Maybe we can pick some of them up later, but it made clear that definitely the factor religion is very important, cannot be neglected, and there are also some comments about the laicistic system of France or Belgium, which might also be one part of the problem, that certain religious minorities and the contact with them might feel a bit excluded. But Mr. van Daele, my last question to you is first also on your priorities. You mentioned you will go to Iraq. What else is on your agenda still for this year?
When I was much younger, I sailed a lot, and I discovered that for 1 hour of the pleasure of sailing, you had to clean your boat at least during 3 hours. What I'm doing now reminds me of my sailing experience, because there is, before I can do my work abroad, there's a lot of work to be done here. Fortunately, and I don't say that because I'm here with you, but I have been helped a lot by the inputs which I got from different religious representatives here in Brussels, and that helped a lot. Trying to find the balance inside the institution is an art form in its own right. You mentioned trade. Well, as far as trade is concerned, a bit naively, I spoke with some people on the side of for trade negotiators and saying, well, I would like you to tell me that I can make people aware that their trade relations maybe depend a little bit on what they do in the field of religious freedom. Now, I got one step which has to do with generalized preferences, which would bring me to Pakistan. But the essential answer was a different one. Was, listen, Ambassador, trade is important, we all agree on that. We have already been asked to link our trade negotiations to climate, and to migration. So please do not add a third issue. But then we discussed on generalized preferences where something can be done, because in the new scheme for generalized preferences, which will happen in the next few years, there are a number of conditionalities, which include freedom of religion. But trying to get this issue a bit higher on the priority list, making sure that everybody sings a hymn of the same songbook, well, that costs me 3 hours to go 1 hour outside. Now, in terms of country priorities, I've staked out Iraq, because my predecessor Jan Fiegel had already started with them, and because there are now specific problems. And so I've been in touch, together with Frans van Daele, with the Iraqi ambassador to see, to try and find the right window of opportunity to go and see that. The second objective is Pakistan. Why Pakistan? Again, because Jan Fiegel started a number of things with Pakistan, and I don't belong to the group of people who think that when they are appointed somewhere that they have to ever to reinvent everything anew. In the case of Pakistan, depends economically very much from its trade with the European Union and from the generalized preferences, and that is something which I have to take account of. I would like I've been invited to Egypt, and it interests me to see which way they have done it. I'm thinking about, because I do not only want to go to countries which are considered to be problem countries. I would like to visit as well a couple of countries who got their act together. I'm thinking a lot about Jordan, for instance. That, yes, something has to, there are countries which I would like to point to. You cannot go around the world and say, we in Europe, we have invented a solution. That's the worst way to approach it. But if you can say, look at Jordan, or look at country X or Y, look at Indonesia, and so on and so forth. In Africa, the worst problems are in the Sahel region, and we are in touch with Nigeria to try and get down to brass tacks with them as well. And then, may I remind you, my appointment lasts till the end of the commission, which means till the end of next year. Thank you.
And I'm also happy to remind our audience that your office is very small and that, well, given all the circumstances you highlighted, I think you're really doing a tremendous job here. I want to stop here because I think we have a very, let's say, religious freedom literate audience, and I would really like to also hear from you what you are interested in. So I open the floor for questions or comments, and I already see Jack, and maybe some, you can let your mic.
Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting panel, which has followed a really lovely lunch. I represent the Anglican Church, and if you come to the Anglican Bishop's office in Ixelles, you will get sandwiches and coffee, but you won't get soup and you won't get lasagna, that's for sure. So thank you very much indeed for that. I have a remark, if I may, followed by a question. And my remark is that it is very easy, and it's been exposed in the panel, to say religion produces problem, religion produces conflict. I understand that in all humility as an Anglican priest. But I also think, hinted at in the panel, is the opposite side of the coin, which is religious literacy and religious competences are essential for solving some of the problems which have been discussed. You can't discuss Ireland without discussing Catholicism and Anglicanism. You can't discuss the hideous problems we have in the Middle East today without discussing Islam. Judaism, and various types of Christianity. And I think that is something which is peace building that we can say without being ashamed in terms of my being a person of faith. My question is this then. Baron van Daele talks about the denominations in America which do good and his extremely important envoy mission on behalf of the European Union. The Anglican Church would love to invite you to Nigeria, which is the largest Anglican province in the world. And I'm picturing the scene, Baron van Daele, when you're in Nigeria, and the Anglicans and Catholics and Muslims, the biggest groups are there, and you talk about human rights, Menschenrechte, droit de l'homme, and that is the negative trigger word. If you talk about denominations doing good, that's understood. Religious literacy, that's understood. But something, and you mentioned it yourself, about the fire of the French Revolution, je fais ma thèse sur Robespierre. So I understand what was at stake in the French Revolution. That can be interpreted within and especially without the European Union as a huge blockage. The droit de l'homme equal colonialism. Droit de l'homme is the European Enlightenment. Droit de l'homme is the North bullying the South. And I'm wondering, in terms of human rights and religion, if there's any easy answer to that. The appearance of colonialism or neo-colonialism just with the trigger word, human rights.
Is this question posed to Mr. van Daele or to the whole panel?
Well, it depends how much time.
Okay,
Yes.
maybe you start.
Well, that's of course a very pertinent remark. I think if you start building a dialogue, which I think in a number of cases is probably the most interesting way, the interesting path to follow, then you have to be clear in your mind what kind of language you're going to use. In my trade, which is diplomacy, it never works if you tell bluntly to somebody what he has to do. Nobody likes to be told what he has to do. But if you develop arguments which say it's basically in your interests to do something, and you must know I have this European Parliament, and so on and so forth, you don't transform the people you're talking with, that they are sitting on the bench of the accused. Then you can have a meaningful dialogue. And then you can attract people who themselves are moderates. If you go right on them, then the moderates become radicals. That's the worst way to do it, I find. And I hope that will work. In my trade, you don't start shouting at people. In the end, it may be necessary at the very end of the process to do so, but find the right words to speak to people, and that is certainly possible.
You want to comment on this?
Yes, I think that human rights, they have to be seen in a certain context. As I come from the Serbian Orthodox Church, I come from the very conservative Orthodox context, where human rights are not really best friends. No, Christian Orthodox moral and human rights, well, we have questions. What kind of questions? LGBTI, euthanasia, abortion. So we reject because of 3 points in the, let's say, international legal human rights framework. The whole concept flies away. I guess in Nigeria also there are certain similar things, like in Southeast Europe, or let's say in the conservative countries, or conservative, let's say, societies which are dominated by majority religion. Now, how to get away? I think every time when I ask Orthodox churches, and there is our colleague here from Romanian Orthodox Church, they have been very open to cooperate in the area of human rights education, in the area of discussion, of theological approach, of developing certain concepts, from this, let's say, very conservative point of view. I guess more or less it's very similar, either it's in Nigeria or it's in Serbia or it's in Greece, conservative point of view, it's conservative point of view. Now, I got last week very interesting question exactly on this point, conservative liberal. So when we gospel, which is a good word that we want to preach to the world. Which gospel? Which good word? Is it conservative or it's liberal? Which one we can promote and how? And that is difficult, let's say, in the societies. Also, it makes division in the communities. And the question is, again, if we gather together and discuss what are the issues and try to compromise, to find a compromise. And Katrin is a very good colleague and a friend, always insists on compromise. And she's working a lot in this direction to help us also here in finding, let's say, on the political and on the legal level. I think we can move, let's say, things forward, but it cannot be in this type of societies my way or highway. Yeah. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you. Patrick also wants to come in, and maybe somebody else has a question, so prepare yourself.
Yes, to a certain extent, I think that the post-colonial narrative is sometimes abused by leaders, religious or secular, to also their own power. But if you go to the street, anywhere, Nigeria for example, and ask people what do they need to live a good life after having satisfied their basic needs, freedoms such as are enshrined in the human rights regime will be named very soon. So it's a universal concept in the good sense. And I think we need to bear that in mind and don't feel too ashamed about being promoters of human rights in foreign policy. And yeah, I think that's the key issue.
Yes, for sure. So if I don't see any more questions, I would ask the panel for a last round of comments, maybe a bit looking ahead. What would you, let's end on a positive note, on hope. So what would you hope for the state of play on religious freedom, let's say, in the world in the next 10 years? Let's start with Elizabeta.
Well, hard question and hard predictions, thank you.
Big question.
Well, it would be great if we extend cooperation between religious community, if we start working more together, with no matter to which religion, color, race, sex we belong to. And together we really can achieve a really great result, and if we also show more solidarity, but really not solidarity in words, but really solidarity in practice and action.
Okay, Mr. van Daele.
I think solidarity is indeed the crucial word. I think in 10 years' time, I hope that governments and churches will have found each other. I hope that churches among themselves will have found each other. I know that the situation in 10 years' time will not be ideal, but the fact is it can be a force for the good if it meets other forces for the good, and that's one of the reasons why we cannot isolate that from human rights. And by the way, human rights, you have to present it correctly to a number of countries because they see that as a form of Western imperialism. The fact is that there are enough international instruments who started 75 years ago, but then these countries were not yet independent. But afterwards there have been a declaration, an African declaration, an American declaration, much later a European one, which basically repeat the same principles and to which a number of countries have subscribed.
The last words.
I think what I would wish for is more dialogue on human rights globally, because we need to work on literacy, both on religion and on human rights at the same time. For example, one prejudice, maybe relating to your case in Nigeria, is that human rights are so individualistic and by that Western, but that's not true. I mean, which of the fundamental rights is really by itself an individualistic right? Of course, at core they are, but as I said, religion you cannot have for yourself. Even if you're descended, you descend from something. An association is not a right for one person. Assembly doesn't make sense as a right for one person. So these are rights that have a relation to groups, and that is something that countries from the global south always stress. We think in societies and social fiber is very important for us, much more than for you. We say, no, human rights are also strengthening the social fiber in our societies, and that's why we need them everywhere in this world.
On this note, thank you very much to our panelists for your great contributions, and thank you very much for being our audience today. Have a nice day.